guys, it's Tori, and today I'm filming my February wrap-up. First of all, sorry if you hear any noises. I have neighbors, roommates, as usual. So I ended up actually reading 9 books this month, which is insane. I don't think there are so many videos out there about how to read more and all that jazz. A huge thing to do to read more is to make a booktube channel or a bookstagram, because it motivates me so much to read and get through so many more books than I otherwise would. So let's just get right into this. The first book I finished this month was The Creation of Anne Boleyn by Susan Bordo, which I ended up giving 5 out of 5 stars. This is a nonfiction about Anne Boleyn, if that wasn't obvious, but it's not necessarily about her life. It's actually discussing the idea of how she came to be, how she's portrayed in media nowadays. So the first part discusses some ideas about Anne Boleyn that are portrayed in nonfiction. Sorry if there was any changes to the angle of the camera. I turned it off for a second because there were people talking in my apartment and I just wanted to make sure it wasn't being picked up on the camera, but it's not. So hopefully you might hear some murmuring voices, but so far it doesn't seem like it's picking it up, so hopefully it's really not. Anyway, it starts off in the first part discussing nonfiction portrayals of Anne Boleyn and where a lot of the sources these people have are. And it was very interesting because it discusses how a lot of the information we have about Anne Boleyn honestly comes from Chapuis, who was the Spanish ambassador, who is obviously on Catherine of Aragon's side and did not like the idea of Anne becoming queen. So it was definitely very biased, and a lot of it was probably made up. And so she just, basically the author just pokes holes in a lot of those theories without necessarily, she kind of gives an idea of how she portrays Anne Boleyn. However, she makes it very clear that there's just a lot we don't know about her. We have very, very few of her actual writings because they were destroyed by King Henry when she was beheaded. And then the second half actually goes into how she's portrayed in fiction, in both books, novels, and television shows, movies, and just what an impact Anne Boleyn has made on the lives of modern day women. And it was just a fascinating book, probably one of the best nonfictions I've ever listened to. The narrator was really good. She was one that I definitely had to get used to because her voice wasn't necessarily like very easy to listen to. It was a little more raspy, but it was really fun because she kind of had this tone of like a gossipy style to her voice that was just so applicable to the subject matter. And I ended up really liking the performance of the narrator. And again, this was one of my favorite nonfictions I've probably ever read. Not that I've read that many, so I feel like it's unfair for me to say that this is an amazing nonfiction because I honestly don't really know how to rate nonfiction all that well, but this one really, I enjoyed it a lot. Next, I completed my reread of Emma by Jane Austen, which I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this novel so much, and this is a comedy following a woman named Emma who, she's very content with her life, where she's at in life. She doesn't plan to get married ever, but she does like matchmaking, and that causes a little bit of trouble amongst her peers in the neighborhood. And it's a beautiful, fun, funny story. I absolutely love Jane Austen's writing and her wit, and it's always fun to pick up another one of her novels and get more of that. I found Emma to be a very fascinating character. She's probably one of my favorite Jane Austen heroines, just in the idea her character arc is so fascinating and well developed, and I absolutely love it. I also love the love interest in this. He's definitely my favorite Jane Austen hero. I know a lot of people would disagree with that for a variety of reasons, but for me, he just represents someone who is very kind and very aware of the world around him. And I appreciate their dynamic in that they both encourage each other to be better people. Yeah, I really like Emma a lot. I think I do like Pride and Prejudice a little bit more, but I do love Emma. Emma's definitely my second favorite Jane Austen that I've read, and I have a feeling it's going to stay that way even as I read the other 3 novels by her that I haven't read yet. I feel like this is definitely going to be in my top 3 at least forever. So also, I'm so excited to see the Emma movie. I don't know when I'm going to be able to because I am in this tiny little town. They're not showing it at the local movie theaters, and The closest place they're showing it is up near my hometown, which is about 3 hours away, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get away to see it, but I hope I'll be able to. If not, of course, I can always buy it or rent it after it comes out, but I'd really like to see it in theaters, so hopefully I can. Next, I completed another nonfiction, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars, and that is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This is a story following a woman, Henrietta Lacks, who in the 50s was an African-American woman who ended up dying of cancer. However, her cells, cancerous cells, were taken, and they were the first cells ever to survive in their incubators or whatever they put it in and continue reproducing. And even today, there's still hella cells reproducing. It's made a huge difference in medicine. They've been able to treat and cure so many diseases because of these cells. They've been able to discover new things in science in general, and it's just been a wonderful, wonderful thing. However, the cells were taken without her knowledge or permission, and without her family's knowledge or permission as well. And so there's a bit of an ethical question involved in that. This story basically follows what was done with her cells and all the amazing things that came from it, but also the story of her life and her family and how they've struggled with what has happened with her cells being taken and used the way they have been. And it's just a very moving and touching story. It is a nonfiction novel, so it's written more in a novel form, especially the parts that are about her family and her life, which made it very engaging and easy to get into for anyone, regardless of their background in medicine and biology and those sorts of things. I feel like I would have given this more like a 4 stars just because there were some things that, there were just some issues I had with it, and some of the writing was a little bit strange for me, and there were portions that I struggled to get into, but I feel like it's such an important story, and I feel like it's one that more people need to read, be more aware of how those wonderful treatments and cures that we've been able to have for the past several decades came about, and being able to respect that story. I think it's just a very important story. Like I said, definitely try this out if you're curious. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful story. It made me cry, which a nonfiction making you cry is rare and far between, so definitely it was very moving. Okay, next we have a bind up of 2 books in one, so I'm going to mention each of them separately and their separate ratings. But first I have The Turn of the Screw, and then the other one is Daisy Miller, both by Henry James. The Turn of the Screw I ended up giving 3 stars, and Daisy Miller I gave 5 stars. So The Turn of the Screw, if you don't know, is a novella following a governess who is hired on to teach and mentor these 2 children. However, she starts to notice strange goings-on in the house and with the children, and she is basically reporting on this experience to a friend who we don't really know how she's connected to this person that's telling the story, but she wrote a letter to him before she died. It's very, very interesting. There's this huge debate about whether she just is crazy or if these supernatural goings-on actually did occur. I really, really liked the story. I feel like I've heard a lot of people say that The Turn of the Screw is very boring, and that's why they don't really like it. And for me, I didn't think it was boring. I thought there was a lot of action going on, there was a lot of creepiness involved, but the writing style made it feel boring because it was just so dense and intense, which at first I was like, well, maybe that's just the way Henry James writes, and maybe he does write other things like that. But then I read Daisy Miller, and it's not that dense. It's not nearly, the writing's a lot easier to understand and appreciate. And so I just felt like the writing style was, it was in first person, because it was from the perspective of the governess. And I just felt like she was so philosophical, but was almost saying the same things over and over throughout the whole book, but like in a different way, so you felt like there should be a deeper meaning to each of these things she's saying, but like there really wasn't. She was saying the same thing over and over again. I will say it was very interesting, in my opinion, if you're curious. I think she probably was going crazy a little bit, just because she mentions some things about her family and her past that she doesn't go into, but she kind of says it in a way that's like, there was problems at home, I've struggled in my past, and things like that that she weaves in, that you're like, this has to have something to do with her mental state and what she's experiencing. And it was definitely a very dark, creepy story, and I did really enjoy this story. I thought it was interesting and fun. It was just the writing that really threw a wrench in it, to the point where it's a 3 stars instead of a 4 stars, because I just didn't understand why the writing had to be the way it was. I feel like it could have been done more effectively, and that's just my personal opinion. I feel like other people probably really appreciate their writing style, because it's definitely a writing style that can grab certain people, so I can appreciate that, but for me, it was just a struggle to get through. As for Daisy Miller, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, so I really liked it. It might be more like 4.5, but on Goodreads, I like to round up as much as possible, so like a 4.5 stars. It wasn't like mind-blowing, and it's not one that I've really thought about a ton since, but I found it to be a really interesting and tragic, sad story, just about people who don't fit in and who are not willing to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not willing to change themselves to fit in. I just really liked Daisy Miller as a character. I thought she was really fun, and I also really liked how the story was actually told from the perspective of this man she meets and who gets to know her a little bit over time and kind of watches her on her experience. She's an American woman who's traveling in Europe, and she, again, just isn't willing to conform. That's the word I was looking for earlier. She's not willing to conform to European standards, and so she ends up just getting herself into some trouble. I just felt like seeing that from the perspective of the man was very effective, because you're able to better see her nonconformity. You were able to better see the tragedy of what is happening to her, because you're able to see through the eyes of someone who does conform and does feel the need to do what's respectable, but also feels a draw to her and recognizes her good qualities more than other people do. So I felt like that was a very good perspective choice made by Henry James for the story. I really liked Daisy Miller. It's definitely one that I feel like will come back to, and that I will compare to other stories, because I feel like it's definitely one that has a message that's applicable in lots of different books, even if those books don't have the same message. I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah, I really liked Daisy Miller, and The Turn of the Screw was enjoyable. So next, I picked up the first and second books in the Dragonwatch series by Brandon Mull. The first one just being Dragonwatch, the second one being The Wrath of the Demon King, which I ended up giving both of these. I think I gave the first one 4 stars, and then I gave the second one 3 stars. This is a continuation of the Fablehaven series, which I read as a child. This story follows a brother and sister who end up staying with their sort of hermity grandparents who they don't really know, but their parents are going on this trip, and so they don't really have anywhere else to stay, and so the parents put them with these grandparents. There's no technology on the property, there's very few things to do, so they kind of just have to explore the garden and the pool and do that sort of thing for a while. And they start to realize that maybe this huge property that their grandparents live on is not all that it seems. In fact, there are magical creatures that have taken sanctuary there. It's a really fun series that I absolutely loved growing up, and just in the past few years he decided to create a spin-off series that is actually following the same characters but just a few months after the events of the original series, which I wasn't sure how well that would go after like almost 10 years since he wrote the last Fablehaven book, but he's done a really good job at bringing the characters back to life and bringing the world back to life, and it's one of my favorite fantasy worlds just because it's so inventive, and I love that series so much. So coming back into this, I was hesitant, but I feel like he did a good job. I ended up giving the first book 4 stars because I felt like it was really good. My only complaint really is the writing. I had heard people when I was younger saying that the writing wasn't that great, and I could see it, but I just loved the story so much I didn't care. But now that I'm older, I was definitely more sensitive to it, but I still felt like the first one did a decent job. It was a fun story, and I was excited to continue on. And then I read the second one, and I gave it 3 stars, and that's because the writing in this one I felt like honestly was worse than in this one. There was just a lot of weird dialogue things where it was kind of info dumpy, but not to the reader. It was like characters info dumping on other characters with information, a lot of information that as the reader we already knew, but they'd be like, oh, this brand new character just came in and I just barely met them, but let me tell them all these things. And you're like, you really didn't need to tell them everything. And it was just a little strange. There was also a few plot conveniences in this one that wasn't as much in the first one. There was one plot thing in particular that I was like, that is so ridiculously convenient. It was like eye roll worthy. If you've read the Fablehaven series, there's a character, and I'm not going to specify who, but there's a character who I feel like just turns up at the most convenient times and just conveniently has all this knowledge, and he comes back into play in this one, and again, it's just so convenient. I just feel like he's the most convenient plot device in this whole series. And I remember, like, when I was younger, I didn't really think that way, but now that I'm older, thinking back, I'm like, he was just such a convenient plot device all the time. And he kind of, again, came back into play in this one very conveniently. But it's okay, I still really enjoy the world in this story, and I'm planning to continue on next month. If you haven't seen my Bookopoly TBR for March and April, I will link that down below because I will mention the third one of these in that video. I also just realized that I have not been saying what Bookopoly prompts each of these fulfilled, so let me just run back through really quick and say that. So we have Emma, which was for my choice. The Creation of Anne Boleyn was for a historical nonfiction. We had The Turn of the Screw and Daisy Miller, which both fulfilled the Victorian read, I believe was what it was. And then Dragonwatch fulfilled my prompt for a middle grade. And then this next one fulfilled my prompt for a high fantasy, and that book was The Hobbit by JRR Tolkien. This was technically a reread, although the first time I read it, well, my dad technically read it to me when I was younger, and I didn't really love it, didn't really get it. I think it was just the wrong time in my life to pick it up. I think I've grown a lot more as a reader, and I'm able to appreciate it a lot more now. So I was like, I honestly don't remember that much about the book either, so I was like, I may as well pick this up because I think The Lost Queen was the one I had as my original plan for this prompt, but it just wasn't gonna work out. So I was like, I just want a easy listening audiobook fantasy book that I can listen to, and I knew I wanted to listen to The Hobbit, so that's what we did. And I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really liked it. I just love Bilbo Baggins so much. I feel like he's kind of an underrated character in the Lord of the Rings franchise just because he had the ring for so long, and it started to definitely take over his mind, but he honestly did fairly well with staying strong against it, especially when you consider Smeagol and other characters who fell. Obviously Frodo had it when it was starting to gain more power because its master was gaining more and more power. So to be fair, Frodo was pretty strong for how much stronger the ring was, but I feel like Bilbo Baggins really had a lot of strength and is not appreciated for that as much. I also love the dwarves so much. They're so funny. These are just really fun books. I read or listened to the audiobooks for the Lord of the Rings series or book, depending on who you talk to, about 2 years ago now, and really liked it, and so I knew I wanted to listen to the audiobook for this one because I just feel like these are books that are meant to be listened to, and I felt like I would enjoy them more if I listened to them, so that was definitely a good choice, and I'm glad I listened to this one too. I definitely will come back to this and The Lord of the Rings sometime again in the future because I do like them a lot. And the last one was just kind of a quick, random book that I ended up picking up, and that was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. Murphy over on her channel, Murphy Napier, actually read this as well in February and talked about it in her wrap-up just this past week, and I needed a new audiobook, but I just wanted something quick and easy because I knew I wanted to get into some bigger audiobooks. I just wasn't in a position to download quite yet, and I wasn't completely sure which one I was gonna do. So I was like, well, this is only 40 minutes. I'm just gonna listen to this for today, and I picked it up and really, really liked it. I had heard a lot about it before, even Murphy talked about it, but I was just like, I may as well give it a shot. And basically it follows a woman who probably suffers from some sort of postpartum depression. She mentions having a child and that she's been feeling very struggles to get out of bed, struggles to do anything. It takes all her energy, and so she ends up being sent into solitary confinement by her husband, and she is surrounded by this yellow wallpaper on the walls, and it starts to mess with her mind. Essentially, as she's in solitary confinement, she goes deeper into her depression and psychosis, and it just causes drama. So it was a really tragic story, but it was very, very well written. I've heard that the author actually suffered something similar to this when she was struggling with depression, and she was put into solitary confinement, and so this was her explaining how that really wasn't helpful. It just made it worse. And at least one doctor, at least according to Murphy and through her somewhere on the internet, decided to no longer treat patients through solitary confinement because of this book. So very, very impactful, as well as just being very entertaining as a horror short story. So I also decided officially that short stories, I like lots of different kinds, but short horror stories, classic horror stories, are like my jam when it comes to the short story. I always just love them so much, so much. So definitely will be picking up more of those in the future. Anyway, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below some of the books you've recently read and loved, as I would love to know, and I will talk to you next week. Bye!